I'd barely been in the house 10 minutes when I noticed my wheelchair was gone. Not moved. Not misplaced. Gone. I'd left it right by the front porch ramp like I always do after transferring into my backup chair inside. I live alone and I've got a system. I'd just come back from the VA clinic and was icing my shoulder when I glanced out the window and saw nothing but empty concrete. No wheelchair. And I live in a neighborhood where we have security cameras courtesy of the HOA. Except they're pointed at the clubhouse and the flower beds, not people's homes. That's how this place works. They care more about the damn petunias than the residents. I opened the Ring app on my phone and rewound the feed. There she was. Karren. Full name: Karren Albridge. President of the High Maple Ridge HOA for the past 4 years and a pain in the neck for every second of it. She strutted onto my property in her pink windbreaker, glanced around like a raccoon sniffing for trash, then grabbed my wheelchair and wheeled it straight into the back of her beige SUV. Didn't even fold it down. Just shoved it in like it was hers. I paused the video and stared at the screen. What the hell? I called the sheriff right then and there. "Sir, you said someone stole your wheelchair?" the dispatcher asked. "Yeah," I said, already uploading the footage to an email. "And I've got the video to prove it. Her name's Karren Albridge. She's the HOA president. Lives 2 streets down." There was a silence on the other end. "Then we'll send someone out immediately." Now, I'm not the type who calls the cops for every little thing. I'm a former army mechanic. I've handled worse than a nosy neighbor. But this was straight up grand theft. And I wasn't about to let it go. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up in front of my house. A tall deputy stepped out, introduced himself as Deputy Lang, and watched the video with a furrowed brow. "She just walked up and took it?" he asked. "Like she owned it. And you're sure that's your wheelchair?" "It's got my name engraved under the seat," I said. "And a sticker from the VA." Lang nodded. "We'll go have a chat with her. Mind if we keep the footage?" "Already emailed it to your department," I said. "I want to press charges. That chair cost me close to $3 grand. And more importantly, it's mine." Lang gave a small nod of approval. "Understood." He left, and I watched his cruiser disappear down the street toward Karren's house. I figured she'd try to weasel her way out of it, maybe say it was a joke or some kind of mistake. But I knew Karren. She wasn't the joking type. This was the same woman who once fined an elderly couple $500 because their grandson's tricycle touched the grass during a visit. The kind of person who sent out 3-page violation notices for things like non-harmonious mailbox paint. She hated me in particular, though. Ever since I refused to let her HOA install a bench on my front lawn for community aesthetics. I told her I didn't want strangers sitting 5 feet from my living room window. She didn't take that well. Still, stealing a wheelchair? That was a new low even for her. A few hours later, Deputy Lang returned. "Well," he said, "you were right. She had it in her garage. Still had your name under the seat. And? We're charging her with grand theft." I blinked. "Seriously?" She insisted it was abandoned property and that as HOA president she had the right to remove it. I nearly laughed. "Abandoned? It was on my front porch. Doesn't matter. You've got the video and your property is clearly marked. She trespassed and took private medical equipment. That's a felony." I watched as 2 more cruisers rolled down the street. Within minutes, Karren was standing in her driveway, arms crossed, lips tight like she'd sucked on a lemon. Her husband, Greg, hovered behind her, red-faced and silent. He always looked like he regretted marrying into the HOA drama. Deputy Lang stood calmly in front of her. "You're under arrest for grand theft of personal medical equipment," he said. "You have got to be kidding me," Karren snapped. "That wheelchair was left in plain view. It was a safety hazard. I was removing it as a community courtesy." Lang didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, you are not above the law. Turn around, please." When the cuffs clicked around her wrists, half the neighborhood came outside. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. I didn't say a word. I just sat on my porch in my backup chair, sipping sweet tea, watching the queen of petty rules get hauled off in the back of a cruiser. But I knew this wasn't over. Not with Karren. HOA presidents like her don't go down without a fight. And something told me she'd try to twist this whole thing into some kind of martyr story. I could already imagine the emails she'd send from jail. But what she didn't know was that I'd been keeping receipts. Not just of the wheelchair theft, but of every shady thing she and the HOA board had been pulling for the past 2 years. fake fines, selective enforcement, mysterious maintenance fees that only ever hit certain homeowners. I had spreadsheets. I had video. I even had a few whistleblowers from inside the HOA. And now, with her arrested and the neighborhood buzzing, it was the perfect time to burn the whole crooked operation down. I woke up the next morning to two things: a headache and a pounding on my front door. I rolled over in my chair and glanced at the time, 6:42. Too early for anyone respectable to be knocking. I made my way to the door and opened it to find a man in a navy suit holding a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that said he'd rather be anywhere else. "You the homeowner?" he asked, adjusting his tie. "Unless someone else is paying the mortgage," I said. He cleared his throat and handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served. Civil litigation notice. Have a good day." He turned and walked off before I could ask a single question. I opened the packet and scanned the top page. Sure enough, Karren Albridge was suing me for emotional distress, public humiliation, and reputational damage. She was demanding $75,000 in damages, claiming my reckless accusations led to her unlawful arrest. I laughed out loud once, just one sharp bark of disbelief. Then I went inside and set the packet on the kitchen table next to my laptop. I sipped on stale coffee while reading the rest of the document and noticed something strange. Her attorney? Same guy who'd represented the HOA last year when they tried to quietly amend the bylaws to allow quarterly beautification assessments, which turned out to be code for charging homeowners to repaint the park gazebo. I recognized his name: Russell Haverly, real estate attorney with a flair for bending definitions. He once argued that a temporary structure could include an RV parked for 6 months as long as it had a flower pot near the door. Karren wasn't just lashing out, she was trying to flip the script, paint herself as the victim. But what she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to a legal aid rep at the VA who specialized in housing disputes. I'd sent him the video, the arrest report, and a growing folder of digital documents I'd been compiling for 18 months. I opened my laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet titled HOA Irregularities, and started adding fresh notes. Her lawsuit was just the first domino. At 9:30, I headed to the community center. Not the clubhouse, the actual community center that sat on the edge of town, the one the HOA never mentioned because it wasn't under their control. It was public. It had free Wi-Fi, good coffee, and most importantly, a few people who hated the HOA as much as I did. I found Anita in the back room, hunched over a copier that sounded like it was chewing gravel. She wore her usual denim jacket with the retired, not expired pin stuck to the lapel. "You hear about Karren?" I asked. She didn't look up. "You mean the part where she got cuffed in front of her begonias, or the part where she's suing you for making her look bad?" "Both." "Good. About time someone put her in the headlines." She handed me a stack of flyers. "I was just printing these." I glanced through the flyer. It was titled Know Your HOA Rights and listed local codes, contact numbers for the county housing board, and a list of legal aid organizations. At the bottom, it included an invite to a town hall meeting next Friday. "You expecting a turnout?" I asked. She smiled without showing teeth. "If we bait the trap right." I spent the next few hours helping her stuff envelopes and send them out to every homeowner in the neighborhood. We weren't going to fight Karren in whispers anymore. We were going to drag the whole rotten board into the light. By the time I got home that afternoon, a different kind of storm had rolled in. Someone had egged my truck. Not just a couple of eggs. A full dozen smashed across the windshield, hood, and side mirrors. The yolks had dried into orange crust under the summer sun. There was a note tucked under the wiper blade, written in block letters. "You messed with the wrong woman." I didn't need forensics to know who sent it. I took photos from every angle, filed a vandalism report online, and then did something I hadn't done since I moved in. I visited the HOA office. It wasn't really an office, just a converted guest house near the pool, with a nameplate that read, High Maple Ridge Administrative Suite. Inside, it smelled like overripe lavender and printer toner. Greg was sitting at the desk, Karren's husband. He looked up and froze when he saw me. "You need something?" he asked, voice tight. "I need to know who has access to the HOA camera logs," I said. He blinked. "Why?" "Because someone vandalized my truck in broad daylight." And considering your wife is currently facing felony charges for theft, I'd like to confirm whether or not this office is being used to orchestrate some kind of retaliation. His jaw clenched. We don't release footage without a board vote. I leaned forward. Then I suggest you call a vote. Today. He didn't answer, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't the problem. He was a man caught in a trap of his own silence, married to someone who steamrolled everything in her path. But silence makes you complicit. I turned and left without waiting for a response. That night, I installed 2 more cameras, one pointed at my driveway, one aimed at the side gate. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. By Thursday, things escalated. 3 residents approached me separately to say they'd received letters from the HOA threatening liens on their homes if they didn't pay compliance penalties. One guy was fined for having a faded welcome mat. Another for a bird feeder, attracting non-native species. The third just had a cracked planter. All 3 had one thing in common: they'd signed the petition Anita and I started last month to audit the HOA's finances. I pulled up the HOA bylaws. Nowhere did it mention the authority to issue fines for cosmetic issues without formal hearings. And there was no legal mechanism for issuing liens without going through small claims court. They were bluffing, weaponizing paperwork. I told the 3 homeowners to send me copies. We were building a case now, not just against Karren but the entire board. Friday morning, I got a call from Deputy Lang. "Need you to come down to the station," he said. "We uncovered something." I met him in an interview room where he slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of invoices. Thousands of dollars paid out from the HOA's maintenance fund to a company called Maple Ridge Solutions. "Recognize the name?" Lang asked. "No," I said. "Should I?" He nodded. "It's a ghost company. No tax ID, no employees, no website. But the payments matched the dates of neighborhood projects like the new sprinkler system and the tennis court resurfacing." I flipped through the pages. "So where did the money go?" "That's where it gets interesting. The checks were deposited into an account under Karren Albridge's name." I stared at the folder. "You're telling me they were embezzling from the HOA?" Lang nodded. "And if enough residents file complaints, we can escalate this to the county's fraud department. But we'll need more than just suspicion. We need a pattern. Proof they abused their positions for personal gain." I left the station with a fire in my chest. This wasn't just about a stolen wheelchair anymore. It was about years of manipulation, intimidation, and financial abuse. That night, I went door to door with Anita and a few others. We handed out affidavits, collected testimonies, and gathered receipts. We weren't just angry, we were organized. By Sunday, we had over 50 signatures demanding a forensic audit and a full investigation by the County Housing Oversight Board. And on Monday morning, I filed a motion in civil court to dismiss Karren's lawsuit with counterclaims for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. We were going to take the whole crooked machine apart, piece by piece. By Wednesday morning, the HOA office was empty. No car in the driveway. No Greg at the desk. The blinds were drawn and the lockbox that usually held the monthly violation slips was gone. It was like someone had scrubbed the place clean overnight. Anita called me from the community center. "They're running scared," she said. "Guess they didn't count on someone actually fighting back." I didn't say much. I was too focused on the growing file I'd compiled. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Anita and I had pulled bank records from residents who'd been fined repeatedly. Each one showed strange charges from an entity called Community Harmony Services. We traced it through a dummy LLC registration tied to a P.O. box in the next county. The registered agent? Karren Albridge. What they'd built wasn't just petty tyranny. It was a racket. A self-funding machine fueled by fake fines and funneling money into shell accounts. We were no longer dealing with a bossy neighbor. We were dealing with organized fraud. That afternoon, I met with 2 investigators from the county's white-collar crimes unit. One was named Morales, sharp-eyed, quiet, wore a tie that didn't quite match his shirt. The other, Darnell, had the energy of a man who'd seen this kind of thing too many times and hated that it still surprised him. "So walk us through it," Darnell said, flipping open his notepad. I laid it out start to finish. The selective fines, the beautification assessments, the fake maintenance companies, the shell LLCs, the unauthorized checks signed by Greg, and, of course, the theft of my wheelchair. Morales leaned forward. You said you had witness statements? 57 and counting. Plus scanned documents and video footage. I've got it all backed up to a cloud drive. Darnell gave a low whistle. You know most HOA frauds fizzle out because no one keeps records? I nodded. I was raised by a man who said, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. They took a copy of the files and said they'd be in touch. I didn't ask for a timeline. I knew this kind of thing took time, but I also knew we'd already lit the fire under them. That night, something shifted. Around 11, my front door rattled. Not a knock, a jolt, like someone trying to force it open. I rolled to the front room and flicked on the porch light. No one was there, but the motion-activated camera had already saved the clip. A man in a hoodie, gloves on, face turned, had tried my door and then disappeared around the side. I called the sheriff's office again, and this time they didn't send a deputy, they sent a full patrol unit. 2 officers canvassed the property, and one of them, a younger guy named Rios, found fresh boot prints in the backyard. They stopped right at my fence gate. Think it's related? He asked. I don't believe in coincidences, I said. He nodded and took a report. Before they left, he gave me his card and suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. I've got cameras and floodlights, I said. Let them try again. But I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. Not to file anything but to watch. Karren's arraignment was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I wasn't technically a party to it anymore, not until the civil countersuit played out, but I wanted to see how she handled court when she wasn't the one writing the rules. She showed up in a charcoal suit 2 sizes too tight, her hair pulled back so hard it looked painful. Her attorney, Russell Haverly, shadowed her like a ghost. They didn't acknowledge me sitting in the second row. When the judge called her case, she stood stiffly and pleaded not guilty. Haverly tried to argue for dismissal based on overreach by local law enforcement, but the judge cut him off. There is clear video evidence of the defendant removing private medical equipment from a homeowner's property without consent, the judge said. That alone warrants the charges proceeding. Karren didn't flinch, but her jaw twitched. The judge denied bail reduction and set the next hearing in 2 weeks. As they walked past me on their way out, Haverly glanced at me for the first time. His expression was flat, unreadable. Karren stared straight ahead like I didn't exist. Outside the courthouse, Anita was waiting. You see her face? She asked. She's not used to being told no. Anita handed me a thumb drive. Got something you'll want to see. Someone dropped it in the donation box at the community center. No name, no note. We went back to my house and plugged it into my laptop. Inside were audio recordings. Dozens of them. Some were phone calls. Others were clearly made during board meetings, ones that were supposed to be closed to the public. In one, Karren could be heard saying, we just slap a maintenance fee on the ones we don't like. Most of them won't fight it. They're too busy or too scared. In another, Greg said, just transfer the funds through Maple Ridge Solutions first. It looks cleaner that way. And then the gold mine, an argument between Karren and a board member named Lisa. Lisa said, this is fraud, Karren. I'm not signing off on another fake invoice. Karren replied, then resign. We don't need you getting squeamish now. You think anyone's going to figure this out? We've been doing it for years. Anita sat back in her chair. That the same Lisa who moved out last year? Left in the middle of the night, I said. Claimed her mother got sick. But no forwarding address. We knew what we had to do. I made copies of the audio files, then drove them straight to Morales and Darnell. They barely said a word as they listened. When the second recording played, Morales stood up and walked out of the room. He came back a few minutes later with a third investigator and a laptop. This is enough for a full-scale criminal investigation, he said. We'll start issuing subpoenas by the end of the day. By Friday, news had spread. A story broke in the local paper, HOA under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and intimidation. They included quotes from anonymous residents, one of whom described the HOA as a financial cult with a lawn obsession. My favorite line came from the reporter herself. What began as a neighborhood organization to preserve property values may have turned into a private slush fund for its leadership. By the weekend, a dozen homeowners held a barbecue in the cul-de-sac near my house. Not just to celebrate but to organize. We drafted a formal petition to dissolve the HOA under county statute, citing systemic fraud and loss of public trust. One man, a retired accountant named Milton, volunteered to be the interim treasurer for a neighborhood watch. Another, a high school civics teacher named Dana, offered to help rewrite the bylaws if the HOA was restructured from scratch. As the sun went down, someone wheeled a speaker onto the sidewalk and played classic soul music. Kids ran through sprinklers. People laughed without glancing over their shoulders. I sat with Anita near the curb, watching it all. "You think they'll actually convict her?" she asked. "With all this?" "Yeah. It's not a question of if, just when." She nodded, then leaned forward. "There's something else you should know. The guy who dropped off the recordings? He left a note taped to the outside of the donation box. Said he was on the board. Said he was tired of being scared." I looked out across the neighborhood. "Good," I said, "because we're not scared anymore." The next morning, a county investigator knocked on my door not with questions, but with an update. "We executed a search warrant at the Albridge residence," he said. "Found financial records, backup drives, and a burner phone with messages coordinating fake fines." He handed me a document. "Greg Albridge has agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." I scanned the first page. Greg had signed a sworn statement outlining the entire scheme, from the fake LLCs to the misuse of HOA funds, right down to the manipulation of board votes by threatening residents with code violations. "He's flipping on her?" I asked. The investigator nodded. "He says he kept quiet too long. Claims it got out of hand." I didn't feel bad for him. Not even a little. Later that day, I got a call from the courthouse. The civil case Karren had filed against me had been dismissed with prejudice. Her countersuit, the judge ruled, was baseless, retaliatory, and unsupported by any evidence. I didn't throw a party. I didn't pop champagne. I just went out to my porch, sat in my chair, and watched the breeze move through the trees. Because for the first time in years, it actually felt like home. By Monday afternoon, the chaos had settled into something sharper focused, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The county fraud unit had made their move, the civil court had tossed out Karren's lawsuit, and Greg had officially flipped. But the storm hadn't passed. It was still building. The difference now was that it was heading straight for them. I was back at the community center, sitting across from a detective from the state attorney general's office. His name was Keen, mid-50s, calm, with the kind of eyes that didn't blink much. He was here because Morales and Darnell had passed the case up the chain. Too many red flags. Too much money missing to keep it local. Turns out, the HOA's books hadn't just been cooked, they'd been scorched and buried 6 feet deep. Keen set a folder between us. "We ran the financials," he said, tapping the cover. "The HOA has funneled over $240,000 in what we believe are fraudulent charges to companies that don't exist. And that's just over a span of 3 years. We've confirmed 3 bank accounts tied to Greg and 1 to an entity in Nevada that's traced back to Karren's maiden name." I leaned back in my chair. "You're telling me she set up an out-of-state shell just to launder HO money?" "She didn't even try to hide it," Keen said. "Filed as a landscaping consultancy. No contracts, no employees, no tax filings. But the HOA wrote it over $55,000 in checks." A woman stepped into the room, then Assistant District Attorney Rowe. She had a folder of her own and a voice like she was used to cutting through excuses. "We're pursuing criminal conspiracy, racketeering, wire fraud, and 2 counts of elder financial abuse," she said. "We have enough to indict Karren and at least 2 other board members." "Which 2? I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Brenner and Shaw." I nodded slowly. They'd always been the ones who signed off on the big-ticket expenditures. Landscaping upgrades that never happened. Sidewalk repairs where no work had ever been done. I'd photographed those empty curbs myself. Rowe continued, "We'd like you to testify. Not just about the theft of your wheelchair, but everything that came after. The civil countersuit. The threats. The pattern of harassment. We're building a case that shows this wasn't just mismanagement, it was deliberate exploitation." I agreed without thinking twice. The grand jury convened within 10 days. I sat in a quiet room under fluorescent lights, explaining how I'd watched my medical equipment vanish from my porch. How Karren had called it abandoned, then tried to sue me when I pressed charges. I laid out the retaliation, the vandalized truck, the audio recordings. I gave them the spreadsheet, the whistleblower files, even the anonymous thumb drive. They listened, asked precise questions, and said nothing when I finished. But I could feel it in the room, the gears turning, the weight of all that evidence stacking up like bricks. The indictments were handed down 2 weeks later. Karren, Brenner, Shaw, all three hit with a list of charges longer than a grocery receipt. Greg got a plea deal, 5 years probation and mandatory restitution. The others? They were looking at real time. The sheriff's office didn't pick them up quietly this time. This wasn't a polite knock and walk. This was televised. I was on my porch again, watching the news crew set up in front of the clubhouse. They'd driven out from the city, tipped off by someone in the DA's office. I didn't ask who. Didn't care. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. HOA leaders arrested in major fraud bust. Karren was led out first, her trademark windbreaker replaced with a blazer that hung awkwardly off her shoulders. Reporters shouted questions. She didn't answer. Brenner followed, red-faced and sweating, muttering under his breath. Shaw just stared at the pavement, silent and pale. The neighborhood was still. No one cheered, but no one looked away either. Anita stood beside me, arms folded. "They're gonna try to spin it," she said. "Claim they were framed or misled." "They can try," I said. But the paper trails got their fingerprints all over it. No one planted that. A week later, the county court ordered a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. A judge froze their accounts. All operations were suspended. The HOA was, for all intents and purposes, shut down indefinitely. That meant no more fines. No more violation notices. No more secret board meetings where neighbors got labeled non-compliant for having the wrong shade of mulch. But it also meant we had to figure out what came next. We held an emergency town meeting in the school gymnasium. Over 100 people showed up. Some angry, some relieved, but most just confused. They wanted to know what would happen to the park maintenance, the pool, the streetlights. All the things the HOA was supposed to manage minus the corruption. Milton, the retired accountant, stood up first. "We've all been paying fees for years," he said. "That money didn't vanish. It was stolen, but it can be recovered. We can form a temporary oversight committee. Volunteers only. No salaries." Dana, the civics teacher, backed him up. "We don't need a corporation to run our neighborhood. We need transparency. We elect people, we set term limits, and we make the books public. Every dollar, every month." I didn't speak until the end. Then I rolled to the front and looked out over the crowd. "I didn't ask to get dragged into this," I said. "I just wanted my wheelchair back." But when someone abuses power, it doesn't stop with one person. It spreads. And if we let it, it becomes normal. I let the silence stretch a moment. We stopped them. But we have to build something better. Not just cleaner. Smarter. No more unchecked authority. No more threats behind closed doors. We take care of each other, or we let the next Karren walk in and do it all over again. The vote was unanimous. The HOA, as it was dissolved permanently. In its place, we formed a simple residential council, 3 elected reps, no power to fine, no authority to impose fees without full neighborhood approval. Everything posted online. Everything voted on in open meetings. The county sent a liaison to help us transition. They reviewed our charter, approved our structure, and even commended us for setting an example of democratic community reform. Karren and her co-defendants were denied bail. Too much risk of flight, the judge said. The trial began a few months later. I testified on the second day. Roe walked me through the theft, the intimidation, the financial discovery. The defense tried to twist my words, claiming I had a personal vendetta. I answered plainly, calmly. I didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. The jury took less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Karren was sentenced to 16 years. Brenner got 12. Shaw 10. The state seized their assets, and the restitution fund began accepting claims. Every homeowner who'd been charged illegal fees was eligible for reimbursement. Some got thousands back. Others just a couple hundred. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. 1 month after the sentencing, we held a block party. Not a protest or a strategy session, just a celebration. Kids played tag between lawn chairs. Someone grilled burgers. A couple of local musicians played blues on the corner. I sat under a canopy with Anita, watching neighbors I barely used to speak to laugh like old friends. "You know," she said, sipping iced coffee, "I used to think this place was stuck, that no matter who stood up, the ones in charge would always find a way to crush them." "Not anymore," I said. She looked at me. You ever think about running for the council? I fought a war to get out of meetings. She laughed, full and loud. Fair enough. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the porch lights flickered on one by one. The street felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because we knew who we were now. Not residents under a rule book, but neighbors looking out for one another. The kind of place where no one could steal something off your porch and get away with it. Not anymore.